is Identity at the Center.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff, how are you?
Oh, not so bad yourself?
Good. Hey, I've been reading the recently released Leadership Compass from Cooper & Cole on identity fabrics. It's, as most analysts report, it's just a lot there.
You're a real nerd, man.
Well, that has nothing to do with this. But yes, that is also true. But that's totally unrelated. But I've been reading this thing, and it's kind of like I'm still trying to wrap my brain around identity fabrics a little bit, to think that there's a leadership compass that lists vendors and kind of says, okay, these are the vendors that do identity fabrics the best. Because I always kind of think of identity fabric as kind of product agnostic or vendor agnostic, vendor non-specific. It's kind of like saying there's a leadership compass for zero trust. I mean, zero trust is kind of a concept that a product can kind of emulate, but there's not a product to go and do zero trust with, right?
Yeah, but this is our desire as human nature to rank things, right? We have to have a list for everything. So, identity fabric is just one of those things that we rank, and I still think it's a concept constantly under definition and maybe redefinition as we're kind of figuring it out. I had a really fun conversation with Eric, my friend Eric from Gartner, actually. So this was at, where was that? Identiverse, I think, and he was kind of explaining some things to me, and I was like, okay, I can kind of understand how that goes. So yeah, it's an interesting space for sure, but I love the fact that we have rankings to help me understand, okay, where do things fit together? Because there's just too many products, man. I can't keep up with all of them.
Yeah. Well, I really got big on the identity fabric concept at EIC last year. I'm hoping that, and obviously Cooper & Cole is the firm that puts on that conference. So the ones who release the leadership compass. So they are kind of driving this concept. I want to keep learning more about it. The reason I brought it up was mostly just to mention to everybody, if you want to get a copy of this thing, here's the free way to do it, which is, go out to, this is not a product pitch, but go out to CyberArk's website. They've got it there. It's a free download. Yeah, you got to give a little bit of information, but you can go ahead and get a copy of that report and read it for yourself.
Exchange your email for information. That's pretty much how that works.
It's true. They got to get a little something. I'm sure they paid Cooper & Cole to have it on their website. But anyway, as a listeners, I'm all about, telling people how to get some free stuff without breaking the law.
Yeah, without breaking the law. That's the key part here. Don't turn to us for legal advice. We're not lawyers. We're just a bunch of identity nerds on this show.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, hopefully people go out and check that out.
Yeah. So other things people can check out are smorgasbord of conferences that we have coming up, and other things that you and I and some combination of one or both of us will be there. We've got things like the official cybersecurity summit that is in Chicago and Philly. I'm trying to think when this episode comes out. Hopefully those will still be there. The Authenticate conference with Fido. Yes, Fido Feud round 2 is coming back. Jim is going to try to topple Megan from her championship post.
It's a definite thing. I mean, let me just say it here. This is the first time I've gotten braggadocious, but first off, we kind of got cheated a little bit last year. I mean, the ranking system, the point system, there were some problems. This year, we're going to win.
Okay.
My team is going to win.
The gauntlet has been thrown down. I'm sure we'll see more stuff on social media that we've been kind of planning out to kind of tease that up to it. But that was exciting time. So looking forward to that. Let's see, that's in October. And then we've also got InfoSec World 2025. That's also in October. So first time that you and I have been at that conference, more of a general cybersecurity conference. So we'll be there with our friends from RSM and some others.
Identity's at the center of cybersecurity, though. So what the heck?
Yep. That a name 6+ years that is still relevant today. Let's see. Then we got Identiverse in November in Washington, D.C. And then we've got the Gartner conference at the end of the year in Grapevine, Texas, with yet another game show planned for that one, different than what we've done before. So lots of stuff. Yeah,
talk to a few other folks that are putting on conferences of one sort or another. Going to the website, that's definitely the place to go. I mean, we get them up there as soon as possible. Sometimes only a couple weeks before the conference date.
Yeah, I have like 6, I think, maybe 7 different discount codes all at the same time. And rather than read them off, and nobody's going to write them down anyways, I'm talking here. Just go to our website, idacpodcast.com, scroll down just a little bit, and you'll see everything we've got active there with, more kind of constantly being added as we firm up some of those partnerships with those conferences. But that's the way you can show support for the show. Use our conference stuff. Doesn't cost you anything. We don't get anything out of it other than just, hey, we show we can bring a crowd, and hopefully that helps get us great guests like we have today with Mr. Darren Rolls, who I am shocked to say has been 5 years since he's been on this show, way back in July of 2020. And, I introduced him a long time ago as an identity dude. He was here, one of the OG guests that we've ever had on the show. So let me go ahead and introduce Mr. Darren Rolls, identity dude at large, maybe independent identity dude, something like that.
There you go. Something like that. Still here.
Still here.
Still
right.
doing it.
So we've got a couple things. We've kind of upped the game a little bit around here. You were here before a couple of our traditions. One of our first traditions that we kind of started was, how did people get into identity? And so you were with us with episode 53, and that was probably, way, way, way before we even started that question. And that's something now we ask all of our guests. Now, since we didn't get a chance to ask you that last time, I'm going to ask you for the first time on your second appearance, how did you get into identity and access management? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
It definitely chose me. Way, way, way back in the early 90s, before I came to the US, actually, I was working on Corba distributed frameworks and for banking in the UK. And we were using a Corba framework to do distributed user and schema management for CI/SAM databases. And so we were basically packaging up schema and user changes and then pushing them out to multiple endpoints in a front-end trading ecosystem. And Tivoli Systems at that time saw what we were doing. We were actually using the Tivoli MDIS distribution framework for doing that. And they were building out a systems management framework, and they wanted to do user and schema management. And so they basically acquired the group that I was working with. And of course, it wasn't called identity management then. It wasn't really even called user management, but that was the technology and the framework that became the first user management framework within Tivoli. And that's what shipped me to the US. So I didn't know what I was working on at the time. But I was kind of geeking out I was an Oracle database administrator and, C programmer, and geeking out on corporate frameworks and distribution at that early time. So that's what dragged me into it, really. But yeah, so, that was many years ago, nearly 30 years ago. And I've pretty much stayed with that ever since. We were at Tivoli as a user administration framework in Tivoli, and then left Tivoli with a small gang of folks and went to Waveset Technologies, which was very early in that cycle. That was becoming identity management. It was provisioning at the time. And we were acquired by Sun Microsystems in 2004. And so that became the Sun Identity Manager. And so throughout that whole cycle, obviously, I'm moving through from being fundamentally just a programming engineer through to being director of technology and through to CTO. And then we left Waveset and created SailPoint Technologies at the time, where I stayed for 12 years. And of course, it was absolutely identity management at that point. And I think we were some of the first people to actually write governance down as a IGA, if you like, as it was phrased. So I can say I've been in it for my entire career.
That's really, that's such a long time, decades, right? So what is the most significant development that you've seen in your career in identity? Is there something you can point back and say, it's like, I don't know, like SAML was the thing, or, the invention of X, Y, or Z, or whatever that is? Like, what's something that's like, well, that really changed the game?
I think standards obviously were a big part of that. I sort of came into it with that first SAML 1.0 specification, worked on that TC, and then I was the editor of the SPML specification, the first service provisioning markup language spec itself. So I think standards were a big piece of it. It was evident at that point that standardization was going to have to happen because there was an industry building around it. I think maybe the largest thing I would say that's happened in and around us is the fact that it stayed the same. well, this seems like a strange thing to say. It's like everything's changed, but everything's remained the same. I can honestly look back and say the things, the tenets of what we were trying to do back then. And I had this thing, the 10 tenets of identity thing. It's completely relevant and almost the same now. So maybe the biggest thing that's happened is it's remained consistent in what it's trying to achieve and what it is. And I know that IGA has certainly had a bit of a tough rap in news and media of late, but I think the principles that it stands for still hold water. So I think identity at the center is maybe something to have captured early, like you did, and because it's still very true.
So is that consistency good or bad? Because consistency is, I can interpret that a couple ways, right? It's okay, yeah, we're still doing the same thing, it's great, but at the same time, are we evolving the way we need to from an identity perspective?
I think we are. I mean, the underlying technology is continually moving, and I think the underlying principles, tenets, and laws, if you like, if Kim Cameron was still with us, I'm sure there would be more laws developing right now to sit on top of the ones that we have. But I think that it's good in one respect because it says that the principles that we're trying to achieve of knowing who has access, concretely understanding entitlement, independent of the system that it's in or the technology stack that it sits on. I think those things are still relevant. And that has to, if you like, a solid set of intent that has to sit on top of an ever-changing set of underlying technology. Because it has changed, right? I mean, look at what we can now do with AI. I mean, it is phenomenal and it is changing what we do. So it's good and bad, I think. We just got to keep reinventing ourselves to some degree.
Hey, Darren, first I wanted to start by just thanking you for coming on the show, but even more grateful for coming on the show back in 2020 when really nobody was listening. And we were like, oh my gosh, we get Darren Rolls. I said the same thing with Eve Mailers. Like, you guys were willing to give us a shot when nobody was listening. Obviously, now people are listening, so all the better, but really do appreciate you giving your time to us, but also to the community. And the first question I wanted to ask you is kind of related to that, which is around who are the people in the industry that really have an impact on you that you look up to? They're your identity heroes. So you're probably the identity hero for some people. Maybe one in the past and a couple of people, one or two that are current people in the industry who are, still vocal.
Yeah, I think there are so many in some respects. I've having seen this space sort of evolve through the standard side first. If we look there, I agree. I mean, I've always loved Eve. She's such a thoughtful, hardworking, considered person, and had the bravery to get out there on some of the initiatives where she's kind of stood alone for a long period of time, and that takes stamina and determination and things. So I think Eve and Ian Glazer. Ian's always worked with Ian for many years, and Larry Robinson at the time when they were both prior to Gartner, when they were at Burton Group. They were the first, really. I remember a little stack of us at Waveset sitting at the back of the room. When they mentioned our name, it was like, they mentioned our name. It was this like kind of thing, because they were really at the forefront of looking at what we were trying to do and others were trying to do and pull it out and make it relevant to customer. So, people like that are eloquent, understand the technology, but understand the market forces. I'd say, coming back to some of my brethren at Waveset, Tivoli, SailPoint, or Waveset and SailPoint, both Mark McLean and Kevin Cunningham, who were our founder and president at SailPoint, had a huge impact on my life. I mean, I worked for Kevin for 25 years. In fact, when I came over to the US, he was my hiring manager at Tivoli. And so that view of product to market, I think, trained a discipline within myself and many people within the organization that I think was directly accounted for the success of SailPoint. So I think, I'm pretty much all of the team very fortunate there to just work with really good people, smart money, make success, right?
Those folks that you just mentioned and what you guys did at SailPoint, and obviously SailPoint's the incumbent now. But it wasn't always that way. There's a time where the SailPoint was the upstart banging the pots and pans. And, what I mean by that is like making noise, like upsetting the apple cart. And now, now SailPoint's the incumbent, right? That vision kind of took hold.
Yeah, very much so. I remember us fighting for recognition. There was a number of us, Access 360, or a bunch of other little companies around it at the time, and really we're bashing against IBM and against Oracle, as many were, and I think many of the new upstarts now feel like, and I do a bunch of advisory work with a lot of those guys, and it's so interesting to watch. It's like it's all reversed, It's like I'm now advising them about what we used to do, about how you better together is the way that you compete with an incumbent. And it sounds like strange. You augment their infrastructure. Now we're going to beat them. You add to their value. The best thing you do in the company is have them resell you. So find a value proposition with it, which is additive, and then slowly move sideways until you eat their lunch. And that's kind of what we did with Oracle at the time. And I see others, attempting to do that now with SailPoint and Okta and CyberArk and others. So really interesting cycle. Just seeing it almost third generation.
Have you thought about it from the other side, where if you're in the incumbent position, what do you have to do to fend off the upstarts who want to eat your lunch?
Yeah, it is. And I'm fascinated by this. And I'm sure there's a book to be written about this curve, this perpetual curve that goes on. I think as an incumbent, it becomes very hard to remain the innovator, because it's all about market acceptance. You're coming down the other side of the bell curve, and you're pushing our product as fast as you possibly can. Your challenges are more about market fulfillment than they are market innovation. The market doesn't look to you to be an innovator, and so you tend not to. And so it's very challenging to remain innovative, particularly, if you're a large company, things move slower. You have you're publicly traded. You have all kinds of additional pressure on you to do so. So I think it's a very special type of company that still pushes the envelope, still innovates. And to be honest with you, I think all innovation is plagiarism to some degree. What do the best of us do is go, Jim, that's a great idea. Did you hear what Jim just said? Let's go do that. And then you all get around, you write on the whiteboard, and then the crazy people go invent it and they go build it before anyone else has even thought of it. And that's pure plagiarism. So, I think it's just how it works.
Yeah, right. And sometimes ideas take a while to. I was having a conversation with somebody the other day, and they talked about authorization companies. And their early, and actually, I think it might have been you. The early authorization companies had the great ideas that are more relevant now than ever, but they had them 20 years too soon.
Yeah, literally 20 years, and that's kind of scary. All this gray thing counts for something, It's like, yeah, exactly that. I've always been a big fan of externalized authorization, because as a governance thinker, I think that the authorization model is so much more interesting than authentication. That binary decision, I think we talked about it, as the binary decision is sort of, less interesting than authorization. And externalizing that is surely the way to go. But who wanted to rewrite the app? Who wanted to restart? And who did it? Boeing did it, Disney did it. Axiomatics were literally 15 years ahead of their time. The time is now right. Every dog has its day, and I'm a big fan of externalizing the auth model and sitting on top of a data graph. And there's some vendors that we know that are doing very well in bringing that architecture to market.
Jeff and I have the pleasure of sitting around and talking to folks like you, and you do too, where you're talking to other bright people in the space. We're talking about what's the next generation of IAM hold. And we've talked to guests in the past. I wish I could remember who said this, but there's the IAM, or the information security poverty line. And there's companies that live below the poverty line. I see it sometimes with organizations where they've just underinvested in identity for so long, and they're still pushing spreadsheets and things like that. What is the state of identity? What's the state of the union? I think sometimes the problem is sometimes companies think we're doing all right. We're pushing paper and things, but we're emailing spreadsheets around, but it's not that bad. It does seem to me like it is that bad, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
Well, I think it's there's that phrase, the desert of the real, right? It's sort of the epiness. Can't remember that. Yeah, when you're out there in the real, right? The real world is just much harder than we as vendors. And we as ex-vendors, as I'm no longer a vendor, still think that way, obviously, come to realize. And I think being real life CISO for the last 4 years of my tenure at SailPoint was a real eye-opener. Feeling it, being it, and being a security guy in a security company is a pretty tough place to be. Right? I mean, it's a job I would never have again because it's just too hard. But I think to answer your question is that the desert of the real is just so much harder than we think it is. So when you come out and look around, you're sort of like, you're still doing that? Surely not. Pushing. I think Ian Glazer once had that phrase. He said the most comprehensive technical element in identity today is the comma. It's the CSV. Like this holy comma. Yeah, this holy comma presentation, which I thought was great. But yeah, that's the reality of the world. That most people, and this is one of these fundamental underlying tenets of truth, is that legacy just doesn't go away. It's still there. And so most people are still trying to chase down things that we said 15 years ago, right? I mean, and it's easy as a vendor to kind of assume that everybody's moved right and they're over here. No. I think it was my friend and said mentor Kevin Cunningham once said that when you're sick of saying it, everybody else is just hearing it. And that's so true. And I think when you're sick of deploying it, everybody else is just deploying it to some degree. The long tail is significant. I think the state of the union out there is still pretty bleak in lots of environments. I think we continue to over focus on what I would refer to as the known. The things that the compliance team said they would fund. Here's the 32 apps. We want them soup to nuts under 32. Go. And some people 5 years in are still doing it. Well, 32, 64, whatever the number of apps it might be. They're still working their way down that old line of thought, as it were. And so I think it's challenging, and something has to come in to challenge people to think about that differently and from a different angle.
I think it's so true what you were just saying there. Of like, you're tired of talking about it, and somebody else is like brand new to them. Jeff and I have been doing this strategy roadmap development with our clients for a decade or more now, and I still have slides. I'm just like, nobody wants to talk about that anymore. But it's like, it's the thing. It's like square dead on, and there's still companies that are innovating and new startups in the IGA space, even though IGA's been around forever. And like at some point, we'd like to just say, okay, well, we're going to focus on the new stuff, but it's that basic blocking and tackling is not going to go away.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this idea, and I've heard it from several CIOs in this realm, that for the first time I hear it, it's almost like to hell with the past. I'm every day I get further from the future, and the exponential curve of technology that we now see, that future is coming faster and faster, and the threats from it are larger and larger. And so some people now sort of go, you know what, I'm going to pause the past, the legacy, the old way of thinking, and I'm going to try and get my real-time, just-in-time, policy-based, contextual access sorted, and I'll come back to the old world after, because they can never catch up. It's a fact of reality, I think, and. But within that, you still have to say, the old stuff never goes away. We create today. Today we create tomorrow's legacy every day.
It's so true that plumbing needs to be there. And I think a lot of people try to build a house without, water, electricity, a door, right? Things like that. Are we in IAM? From a generational standpoint, you mentioned kind of the different generations, and maybe we're on Gen 3, and maybe that's specific to IGA, but you did share a concept with Jim and I earlier around this concept of IAM v3. Is that because of AI? Is that something else that is driving it? I mean, I'm assuming AI drives a ton of different, not assuming, AI does drive a lot of things when it comes from an identity standpoint, because now we're talking about things like agents and, non-human, which is the new term for machine or, server account, server accounts, things like that. Tell me about this concept of IAM v3 and kind of help our audience understand your thinking around that.
Yeah, see, and the question I usually get if ever I mention that V3 is like, well, where does it come from? And is it V3 in terms of Web3 or wherever it comes? I use it just to sort of say .next, really. It's much easier than saying identity.next. But I do think now there's a need to rethink prioritization, if nothing else. And it really, and everyone says, show me the architecture. And I thought, well, I can show you patterns of excitation, if you like, in the ether that represent products, if you like, but don't even think of it that way. I think some of it comes down to recognizing a changing priority. And it sort of comes back to I'm a big advocate right now for the fact that folks need to rethink the drivers, particularly for a classic enterprise IAM project, right? Who's paying for it and where does it come from? And it still very much comes from the known, as I would put it, from sets of large enterprise applications that we consider sloppy administration is our biggest enemy. Well, we now know that the adversary, who is, as you rightly now say, Jeff, is an agent. I mean, the future isn't a hacker. The future is agentry that's going to be all over the enterprise, all over everything.
But they're not just adversaries; they're also your allies in some cases, right? Because you're going to have agents on both sides. This is like the Matrix. We've got AI programs on both the good and bad side, kind of fighting each other. And I've kind of joked before, all right, well, you AIs fight, and then let me know what you decide as the human.
Yeah, and it is an interesting, terrifying, and intellectually challenging thing to think about. But yeah, I mean, our good can be our bad. Just like we said, campaigns on this many years in the past. The biggest problem is your best employee kind of thing, making a mistake or being phished. But the same thing's going to happen for agents, right? I mean, we know how to spoof agents. We know how to spoof, many things. And now with so much movement and it coming so quickly, one of my greatest, it's the OG thing. It's like, have we learned nothing? That, the recurring pattern of what we're doing with MCP right now, what we're doing with tooling and how quickly we're putting these scaffoldings together for these new things. Are we sure we've got it right? I can't believe, why would we get it right this time? We got it wrong every other time, history shows us. And so, I think V3 for me is a bit like, okay, stop for a second and let's think about where these projects come from. And I've got this nice little chart where I sort of visualize every resource that an enterprise might have, be they large, small, whatever. And you've got sort of how important the business thinks it is and how instrumented it is in the infrastructure running on the other axis. And what we tend to do, the truth is the vulnerability is across the whole spectrum, right? Little tiny Java apps sitting on the edge that Bob created and threw out there and forgot about, massive things in the cloud which we're hopefully managing the entire for. They're spread across this matrix. And what we tend to do is choose things in the first phases of our projects that suit our funding and suit our capability in the infrastructure. And they tend to be large apps that we have. When you go to your vendor, you say, do you support? And they go, yes. So you start there. And that's very much, whereas I think this notion and a phrase that I've used many times in the past is, time to visibility and time to understanding is maybe the prime visibility, because the adversary knows that. We train the agent to do that. The adversary agent now looks for things that look for low management. That's, if you're managing it, you'll notice what's going on. So I think V3 is a little bit about timing. Pause there, if that makes sense. Timing and funding and thinking about scope.
Are we getting smarter faster? So I look at AI, right, and it's just, every day there's some breathtaking new use case for it, and it just keeps getting better and better. But I'm also seeing that there's a lot more coordination with some of these vendors. So things like, for example, MCP and A to A. I kind of think of those as sort of like SAML and OAuth, but it took many years to get to the point for SAML and OAuth. And here we are only, let's call it 1 to 2 years into the kind of the next gen or the generative AI kind of world that we're all living in now.
Right.
So I feel like we have learned some things in the past. Now, is it ever going to be as fast as we want to? No. But are we getting smarter faster when it comes to developing standards and integrating all of these different technologies in a way that, hopefully is secure and has the appropriate controls and things like that in place?
Maybe. I am a big fan, you might say, because I'm a sidelines fan. I haven't contributed anything to SSF, the framework, or to Kite, or any of the standards that sit on top of it. But I do think an ontology of method, an ontology of typing, of people, of things, of entitlement, of classes of risk. I'm a big ontology fan. I kind of always have been. The semantic web, when I saw it, Barnsley and the crew came out, I was like, this is the future. This is how we're going to solve everything. Because without a knowledge of a type, how can you interact with it in an automated fashion? So I think there's a lot of hope there. And so I do think in my 3.0 architecture, I would have a shared signals framework. I would put a lot of faith there, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of agreement capability. There's some simple things like we're finally going to do global sign out. Amazing, after all this time, we're going to do it with SSI for a while, but okay, so we've got that, but there's much potential there for much more interesting things, and it could come from operational telemetry as well. This idea to create ontologies of things that are well described, that understand things like what an entitlement is and how you can grade it. I think that's super interesting, because then we can attach machine intelligence to that typing and that reference model and do more interesting things with it. Big fan there.
Darren, one of the things I want to bring this back to this AI conversation, because here's what I think. I think practitioners throughout time, and this is one of the reasons I think that organizations underinvest in IAM, because there's always something better out there just on the cusp. And now it's AI, and it's like, why even invest in IAM right now when this AI thing is going to come and it's going to be way better than what I have now? I guess to turn that into a question for you would be, are my current investments just going to become like worthless junk in a couple of years when the whole enterprise goes AI? Is that even a reality? Or will some of these things still be, is identity and access, is it going to look something like it does now, a few years down the road, where maybe we're not 100% AI, maybe that's just a pipe dream, but AI is definitely having a major impact in replacing applications, and our organizations are starting to build agent-based applications rather than the traditional coding model of client-server applications or web-based applications the way they are today?
Well, let's face it, right? Us OGs here, we can say everything that we come up with today is going to completely change everything we've done before, right? This is what we do, right? Because we're all fascinated by it. We're all like little scientists who love the new thing. We wouldn't be here if we didn't, right? So there's a certain element of that. I do think the composition of the stack changes, and time to implementation should shorten in every sense. Even in the AI that we add to our legacy IAM stack, it's focused on faster deployment, faster time to value. So I think there's a certain amount of that is definitely tangible. I do think the way we're going to implement these things is changing, and the technology. I mean, let's face it, what you can now do with a simple ChatGPT session is remarkable, or Anthropic, whichever foundation model you tend to work with. But let's just stop for a second and go, all that does is accelerate us to the same place, right? We've still got an entity, be it human or more human than human, which is something we should come back to. I'm a bit of a Blade Runner fan. You're still going to make an access decision. right? And what we've done is we've made the matrix even worse, right? Because we've now got an agent that is owned by somebody, operating on behalf of somebody, using a proxy account to get hold of some legacy data. So we've now got 3 pins, if you like, of exponential variable to apply. But we've got to make the same decision. Who has access to what, when, and why? And then when they did, was that appropriate? And can I prove it? I don't see how, this is my point earlier, that fundamental tenet doesn't change. It's just got harder, and it's going to happen faster without people knowing about it.
So I've been reading about and learning about, and I don't know why I haven't put it into action yet, but this whole idea of vibe coding. And so I'm not sure if you've given it a try, but I keep hearing about how, development as it's done today is not going to happen much longer. Consulting isn't going to, you're not going to need consultants pretty soon. So I don't know what the heck any of us are going to do. The AI is going to be doing everything for us, podcasts, and we're going to have to wash our own clothes because the robots aren't there yet.
Well, I hate to say it, but there's already AI doing podcasts. So
yeah,
maybe it is washing clothes.
Yeah, I don't know what the rest of us are going to do. And maybe we'll have to do some kind of manual work, which I know Jeff and I are both allergic to. But I don't know, vibe coding, have you gotten into it at all where you kind of like tell the AI, the LLM, here's what I'm trying to achieve, and it'll write the code for you?
Absolutely. I'm a bit of a hack, a bit of a hacker. You can usually look at somebody's coding preferences and decide where they are. I like Perl. Right, straight away. As soon as I move from C to Perl straight away because I like something, I'm Python even more so, low declaration. There's no better intuitive declaration language than speaking to a computer, right? And so, yeah, I have a little bit. So my daughter's a type 1 diabetic, and so I'm always interested in how I can create utilities that could help more. Right, when you look at panel information, so I sat myself down and said, hey, I want to create a system that will take in blood panel data, do it securely, don't want it in the cloud, want to do this, RAG this, blah, blah, blah. I just blurb it out to the thing. I mean, it gives me a package. It gives me a complete package. And then I've got a problem with my Python install, and it tells me how to fix it. I mean, it's like, holy mackerel. And you know what? I now get a little UI and go, pop, and it pops up and it says, do you want to download your stuff from your Apple profile? And I go, yes. And it just does it. And I say, pull in this spreadsheet, and it gives me the normative curves for it, and then points to a whole bunch of medical research. I mean, holy mackerel.
Yeah.
No, it's not perfect. It's a hack. But
you weren't able to just like knock that out in that amount of time before.
Oh, goodness.
I think, one of the cool things about having you here, Darren, like we have like some rough notes that we want, but I'm just like, I got this guy here. I'm going to pick his brain. One of the other things that kind of a shift that I'm seeing in our identity industry is more of a shift toward, when you look at like the new, and I shouldn't say it's a shift toward, but it's like a lot of the new products are spinning up, and, a big thing is about monitoring what's going on. So rather than managing and controlling the access being the focus of the new product says, all right, here's your environment. Put our tool in your environment. We're going to watch what's going on. We're going to monitor what the identities and access is doing. And we're going to tell you when things are wrong. I mean, I was talking about it at a very high level. They all have their own different approaches to do that. But that seems to be a big shift. How do you feel about that?
I think it's inevitable, and it's good, and it's right. And we should cast away some of the historical legacy preference that we have in order to make that work. And let me explain what I mean by that. So one of the companies I work quite closely with, Orchid, they have an orchestrator, an endpoint, and I don't want to make this about them, but it is indicative of the class. That's why I'm bringing it up. They have, if you like, an OS level telemetry dissolvable agent that is like the smartest identity guy you've ever met. And it sits there and it goes, oh, there's a port over there. What's going on over there? Oh, there's a port connecting to some code. well, let's go see what that code is. Let's reverse engineer that code. Oh, that code, hey, there's an AD group call coming on it. And it reverse engineers you down to a registerable connector for an IGA platform, for example. And you go, holy mackerel, it can do that? And yes, it can. And it's fundamentally OTel, right? It's operational telemetry mixed with a whole bunch of other tech. And you look at it and you say, well, but it's identity is agentless, and you go, well, maybe in the future it's not. It's self-aware. And I think one of the things that coming out of SailPoint in 2020, I was sort of very keen on this idea that we had to stop identity from being a centralized management funded process. That's kind of what we've been talking about, to being this disseminated thing. And I don't mean distributed in terms of, self-sovereign identity, maybe, but I mean in terms of it just being there, being present, and being self-operating. It's sort of unable to understand what that means and integrate it for you. And that future is a real potential. That technology is here. It's enabled by AI, and it's enabled by, thinking in a new stack, and so I do think that has a big chance to change the game a little. When we're fighting an automated adversary, obviously we have to defend it with an automated ecosystem, and that's one of them. So I think there's a lot there, and I think also, again, I'll come back to that ontology. I think one of the things that I'd like to see in the OTel standards and others is this firm view of what things are. Because if I say to you guys, I mean, we're really anointed, right? If I say what an entitlement is, we've all got a different view of what it means, and we say what a risk factor is, or what a permission is, and so patterning that stuff down in the underlying infrastructure would be a very, very smart thing to do.
And this is the worst it is ever going to be, right? For AI and some of these tools, right? It can just continue to get better and better and better. Or I should say, maybe better is not the right word. More capable is probably a more appropriate word, because we don't know yet if it's good or bad, and it's going to be used for both. But this leads me to one thing that you've mentioned in the past somewhere that I saw was that laws might be better than architecture. And so I'd like to understand a little bit of first of all, did I get that right? And if so, what is the thought process behind that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to some of the things we've touched on, recurring theme, right? Is that the architecture will continue to change. Like, for example, you're doing this, speaking to companies yourselves, and I think the legacy is part of that architecture, and we tend to not think of it, and that's almost a law unto itself, is to say that you can't flush stuff. It just doesn't work like that. The long tail of these technologies remain in place for some considerable time, and so what does that mean in practical terms? It doesn't boil down to a specification. It boils down to a principle that says, come into this understanding that the integration of the new and the old is a prime directive, because that's what you're going to have to do. And I think things like, I've always used this term model-based. We used to talk about it in the birth point of governance. We'd always say, it's model-based, and being guilty there of that ontology. What the hell is a model, Darren? Well, a model is a conceptual understanding of something. And again, the law we've learned here is that we have to make our desired state model-based. And whether that does it, when I say model, is that RBAC? Well, it was at one time. It's probably not now. Is it, Mike over at Glue talks about TBAC, token-based access control. And I think we're going to keep inventing things. But a law, rather than an architecture, for me, would be make sure that you can codify the thing that represents the rule for you in a way that it can be governed, that it can be understood. Because, we're not doing a great job of that right now, even in the new rev that we're putting in terms of all the policy languages. Just the ability to test the policy and see what it means. That should be a law of the model. The model, you should be able to express it, and you should be able to say, prove yourself, prove yourself, prove yourself. And that means, show me who would have. Oh, Jim, Darren, and Jeff. That's the answer to my evaluation of the policy as a speculative evaluation. So, gosh, sorry, that's a huge diatribe to get to a point of saying that's a good example of a model of a law. The law should be around the law of models for access, regardless of what they are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And it leads into this next question I'm going to ask, because I think that the IAM practitioner is the ultimate pragmatist. I think sometimes people believe that consultants live in the ivory tower, and some do. But for the most part, we're kind of pragmatists too, because we have all these great concepts and everything that the industry's trying to do. Yet we work with clients who they've got a problem now. Like, we need to fix this problem now, not worry about down the road. And I think, the clients, or what I'll just call the IAM practitioners of the world, they're the ones living with this problem. They got one foot in the past and have to support legacy systems, but they have to have one foot in the future. They have to be thinking about the next thing, or else it happens and they don't have a solution for it. I think this piece around shared signals, it to me is like the right solution for the right time. At the same time, folks are trying to solve some of the current problems, and they might not know how to articulate that business value of kind of investing in something that is more future facing, especially if they're not like a technology company or a cutting edge company. Taking all that context, I would like to ask you to help that practitioner put together their sales pitch or their way of thinking about something like that to make the case, and I call this that identity version 3, the kind of next generation. How do they think about that and then make that business case in the boardroom of their company?
Yeah, always hard. I mean, making that business case is so hard, right? I think IGA did a very good job of that by professing automation. We can get you what you need faster. Don't wait for your account. There were real things that made that business case pointy and resulted in it sort of being lead project directive for many, many years. But I could sort of come back again to that underlying thought that we as practitioners have to live in a world of reality which involves the past, the current, and the future. And so I think a meta architecture, you might say, for that is one that says, I think we're still going to be doing static, profile-based, legacy systems administration time stuff. I don't see how that's going to go away. Those systems are still going to be there. So the pitch is we have to manage that. We do still have to manage profiles and static applications, be the on-prem or in the cloud, traditional governance administration, you might say. But now we've got to think much more critically about runtime, real-time, context, right? In session, if you like, which is where externalized authorization and some of the things that the likes of Signal talk about in that bucket there. They've obviously got a brethren of others that do the same. Where it's much more about the context, making decision in the session. You've got to do that as well now. It's unfortunate that that's not. And then we've got to look over on the right-hand side of that, almost like to a third pillar, and say, well, what am I going to do about these agents? I mean, it would be foolish now not to consider that. And I think there's, some things we touched on about MCP and how you're going to put gateways in front of MCP and how some of the things that you can do there. But it has to be in the diagram at once. So I think the mature thing for us to do now is to sort of fess up a little bit and say, look, this stuff is moving faster than any brain can manage. So let's accept that we have a past, a present, and a future. And let's try and find commonality there. Let's try and find things that could leverage all three tiers of that sort of legacy static admin time, that current state, in the loop, just in time, whatever labels you want to call it, right? Decision making, right? And this edgy future, which is still not baked, let's face it. Is that any easier to sell to a CFO? No. But I think we're going to see I honestly believe we're going to see a new extent of vulnerability coming out. This is not just going to be about ransomware and being popped. It's going to be like opening a can and it being festering with insects. See, we're going to find a friend of mine I was dealing with last night said, imagine a scenario where somebody gets in and trades all of your stock, your pension fund trades all of your stuff. It's all gone. It's all traded and gone. What are you going to do? Billions of dollars. And you open that can up and it's full of that. Future is coming. And maybe that will change us because I think we've become a bit like, oh yeah, I got popped. Oh well, everyone else did too, so no problem. Yeah, I think maybe that will flush us to me. We make us a bit more conscious.
Well, congratulations, Darren. Now I'm thoroughly disgusted with just the visual of a festering, pot of bugs. Not my jam. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that I'm cognizant of time because I do want to ask you about kite surfing. But before I get to that, give me what's one prediction that you'll make around IAM and let's say sometime in the next 3 to 5 years? So sort of near term. Like what's something that you think will surprise people from an IAM perspective?
I think people will be surprised what we can do with next generation infrastructure that is layered on top of the legacy. That's layered on top of the squad legacy, the current operate. If we're able to keep moving forward on the operate, I think people will be amazed, just like I am today when I want to write something, how intuitive the machine can be. I don't believe it will ever be sentient, truly sentient. I don't believe it will be conscious. We could get into that for a whole podcast. But boy, is it going to be smart, and that's no news for anybody, right? So I would temper that by just saying, and you know what? You'll still have all the old stuff.
I'm less disgusted, so that's good. Let's shift here to a little bit of a lighter note before we wrap things up. You mentioned before we hit record here that you're into kite surfing. And that's one of the things that we've also started since the first time you joined us way back 5 years ago is we end shows on sort of, something non-identity related. We get kind of neck deep sometimes into identity, or if we're talking the cloud, sky high in our heads, right? Things like that. And so we like to kind of find out what people do in their spare times or just kind of fun conversations. So that's sort of like the genesis of this. And you mentioned kite surfing. Now, I've never been kite surfing. And so you're going to be my Obi-Wan. And you're going to explain to me, first of all, what is it for people who aren't familiar? I think I'm familiar with it, but maybe people aren't out there. And if I wanted to get started, what is the easiest way for me to get started with kite surfing?
Right. And I guess what I do now is kite foiling. So basically I ride a hydrofoil, which is basically an airplane wing under a surfboard, a tiny little one, with a kite in the air to drive it forward. So it's an incredibly low drag coefficient. So it's very efficient on the water, very fast. You can jump, move around. I've always been interested in wind sports. I was a windsurfer for many years, came to the US as a windsurfer, stayed in Austin because it was like, you don't need a wetsuit. What do you mean? It's amazing.
Now I'm just picturing you like, windsurfing all the way from into the United States off the water.
Pretty much. I mean, I came here, like I said, if it's windy in England, the weather's crummy. Here in Austin, we had good. So I came here as a windsurfer and then progressed to kite surfing. So you're on this little tiny surfboard with a hydrofoil, a plane wing underneath you, and a kite dragging you around. It's extremely exhilarating. It's outdoors. It's in the environment, and I think I'm drawn to it because it's kind of an in the moment thing. We live very cerebral lives. I'm fascinated. I'm a bit of a researcher. I'm fascinated by brain at the moment. I've been fascinated by geology. I'm always sort of, this is something, no, you shut it down. You're on the water. You've got this giant, powerful thing above you covered in lines that cut your head off. Boy, you better be present. So it's very here and now. So I love that from it. If you want to start with it, you have to dedicate some time to it. And you just have to go to a great resort where there's a nice beach. So you can learn how to fly a kite, because ultimately you're flying a kite, just a kite in the sky. And you have to, it's not something you can just go try. It's not like riding a bike, anyone can mountain bike, right? Not everyone can kite surf, and I think that's one of the things. So you got to find a good kite school in a great location in South Padre in Texas, or I have a place in the Columbia River now. I'm actually in Washington State, just in Hood River is one of the founding places for it. So go somewhere like Hood River, find a good kite school, and go for it, because it's boy, is it exhilarating.
How fast do you get doing that? Because obviously it's wind probably plays a big factor in that, but how fast can you get going?
You can go faster than the wind, which is very interesting. So from physics perspective, it's very interesting. So you can go anywhere from 25 to 40 knots. So, anywhere from 30 to 45 miles an hour, depending on the foil that you're using and where you are. And you can jump. And that's what I like about it. So for an old, I'm 58 now, so I really shouldn't be doing any of this, but I like to jump. You can hit a wave, and we've now got all these devices that will tell us our GPS locations. I'm on a thing called Surfer, and I can jump 40 feet in the air. So you can boost up a wave and go 40 feet in the air and feel. And in Hood River, there's the Mount Hood there, and it looks like you're jumping over it. It's just phenomenal, and so that's quite a rush. So you can go fast, you can jump high. So
that sounds amazing. So I guess you could probably get carried away by the wind as well, right? How do you control coming back down if you get caught up in a strong wind? I imagine you're going to go quite a distance.
It has happened. People get picked up, thrown around. I've been thrown on the floor. In fact, I remember going to an identity event on the East Coast. It was maybe one of the Gartner events on the Sunday. I got picked up and slapped on the floor, and that wasn't a lot of fun. I could barely walk, and I still made it. In fact, in 2008, I think I broke my leg actually windsurfing, and I actually went to a conference, a user conference, on crutches from it. So yeah, it can be. You've got to be careful, but I think without risk, that's what adds the spice, right?
Well, that's part of the sport, I guess, of it too, right? It is a physical activity, so there's inevitably some chance of injury. At first, I was thinking, okay, well, you're over the water and like you've got water to break your fall, but if you hit the water going 30, 45 miles an hour, that can cause some damage.
Oh, big time. Particularly if you get the kite wrong, it can swing you like a pendulum and slap you down on the ground. If you're unlucky, don't go near the ground, but on the water. Yeah. I don't want to make it sound like it's a big radical thing. I now like to cruise around. I'm an OG, definitely. I like to cruise around and jump, but it is fun when you can jump over those young kids that think they're really hard. They're like, that old man just jumped over me. What the heck?
Jim, have you ever been kite surfing or windsurfing?
No, you know what? But I've seen it so many times, and it looks so much fun. So I was just sitting here enjoying hearing Darren, and then when he said, well, you got to have some risk or something, I was just thinking he's spent his career building systems and building around the business proposition of reducing risk. And here he is inserting risk into his life. I just find it a little ironic, but sounds super fun. I would love to try it.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'm not much for water sports. I think the one time that I tried to water ski, I got dragged behind a boat. I forgot to let go of the rope, and so I was kind of going face first and through the lake off road. I was like, oh, I should probably let go of this thing now. And that was my one and only attempt at standing up on skis. So Darren, I know you're laughing at me, but that's a true story, and that was 30 plus years ago.
That's the thing, be prepared for a little humility, right? Because it happens to everybody. I pulled up at the beach the other day, and there was a little, we call them the peanut gallery. There's a little gang of them, all people I know that, and right in front of everybody, got it wrong, got slapped down in the water like a newbie, and everyone cheers and waves their arms in the air. It's kind of generally a good crowd with that. But yeah, hey, we're all human, right? That's what happens. Again, if it was easy, probably wouldn't want to do it.
Yeah, that's true. And it's probably a rite of passage, right? To eat the water, so to speak.
Most definitely. Like I said, I've been dragged behind that same boat.
Well, Darren, I appreciate you coming back. I can't believe it's been 5 years. Let's not make it so long next time. I hope you'll come back and share some more of your insights. It's always great when we get to talk to just, OGs in the space and people have such an influence on it. So, and I echo Jim early on saying, yeah, thanks for joining us so early on. Like I said, nobody was listening, and, to get someone like you on was really validating for us, and it still is. So thank you for being part of this.
I think you guys are doing an awesome job, and you back it up with practical, real experience in the field. And and you're at the events, and so I'd love to come. I'm going to go. I didn't know about the using the code. I'll absolutely do that. And next event, let's make sure we sit down and have a soda together.
That is a deal for sure. All right, I'm going to put your LinkedIn in our show notes as well as some other links for people to check out. So, that's it. I think that's all we got for this week. We're on the web, idcpodcast.com, do all those fun things like and subscribes, helps us get great guests like Darren. And yeah, don't forget our discount codes on the website as well. So hopefully we'll see a lot of friendly faces at our different conferences we'll be at. And yeah, that's it. So thanks for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with y'all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.